all of this. We're here again to talk you through today's tasks. If you're just joining us, don't worry, it's not too late to catch up on the previous day's tasks. Everything is recorded so that to a certain degree you can do it at your leisure. So today our focus is on, many of our talks have got a kind of international focus, and that got us thinking about the kind of movements in and out of areas, and the different people that made up an area, some who would have been born there, some who wouldn't, people who left, and some people who came back, or depending on where you are, if you're in an area by the seaside, for example, you may have a tourist element to your one place as well. So for this task, we wanted you to see whether you could find common characteristics between different groups of people within your one place, and we picked these areas of common characteristics, people who were born there, moved out, or visited. So I don't know whether Jo or Liz, in your one place study, whether you've got any movements, people going in and out.
I think most of the people who moved in and out of my one place study tended to move quite locally. There are a few people who perhaps were born, I can remember off the top of my head one lady who was born in what was at that time, British India. People didn't tend to travel too far, generally speaking, but of course there were incidents of international migration, and I know there were some families who'd moved to Canada, and it's something, one of my future projects is looking more closely at migration, and for those people who left, where did they go? And the people that moved into the area, where did they come from? And you might, depending on where your one place study is located, find that, for example, in my street study, it's in a naval town. And so there were quite a few naval officers came and went that perhaps rented a house for a few years while they were based in the area. So there's probably more migration in my street study than there is in my one place study because of the nature of the local workforce. So it's an interesting aspect to look at, who the mixture of people there would have been.
I think it could be really surprising, because I think when you think of a city, you quite often think of it being kind of cosmopolitan and maybe having different quarters, like a Jewish quarter or an Irish quarter, for example. But even people came and went from all sorts of places. Isn't there quite a large wasn't there quite a large Italian migration to particular parts of Scotland at one point? I think it can be quite surprising who came in and out of your area, and let alone who visited it. So okay, so hopefully that makes sense for that task, to kind of consider those points. And the next task is to look at the national and global influence upon your one place study, and some of these have been highlighted in the talks that we've given, that have that a moment in time symbol on them in the speaker schedules, there where they're focusing on a place during a specific time. And obviously I think one of the most obvious impacts upon a place is World War I and World War II, but of course there are lots of other national and global influences upon a place, and this is your opportunity to dive in and explore those things that you might kind of be well aware of at that big level, but actually look in really close detail about how they affected your particular place, because it can be surprisingly varied across different areas. So something like the swing riots will have had impact in a particular area more than it will have in other areas, just as an example. Ruth, I don't really, you can think of any more national and global examples.
Yeah, I mean, coming back to my own ancestry, happy events like a coronation, how was that celebrated in your place? I've got stories of my ancestors and how they were involved in the village fair festival and decorating the whole village for the coronation of George V, I think it would have been, and the fancy dress competition. And I think having things like that, and which houses had displays outside.
Newspapers can be an fantastic resource for this.
Yeah.
My favourite resource.
Yeah.
I mean, local example. Sorry, I was just going to say a local example, probably more than a national one, which certainly had an impact locally, would have been in Cornwall with the mining industry. Once the mines had all been sort of mined out, there was a huge exodus of miners who went to, you know, the usual places of Australia, Canada, America, you know, used their transferable skills, and also, you know, some perhaps more unusual places like Brazil, you know, that you didn't see as frequently in migration, and some came back, some didn't, some took their families, some didn't. But you know, there might be some sort of local industry that if it suddenly dries up, they, you know, may have migrated perhaps to Wales, you know, to work in the coal mines, or they might have gone abroad to use their mining skills there. So there are all sorts of reasons why people might have come from or to a place. So it's very helpful, I find, to look at the push and pull factors. Were they sort of perhaps driven out of a place because work had dried up, or were they pulled towards another place because, you know, work there was plentiful?
Yeah, it's really surprising. Also,
Sorry.
I was just going to say, I remember researching for a client who had family in Sheffield and finding out about the terrible flood that happened in the can't remember what year now, sort of beginning half of the 1900s, I think, or 1800s, and that had a massive impact on the local area. And it was only through diving into the local history to get some context on her ancestors that I discovered it. So it is all those kind of things. But sorry, Ruth, I interrupted you.
No, I was going to say, you mentioned miners coming into Wales. Well, I mean, I live in Wales, and the Welsh-speaking community are very aware of people leaving this area and going to South America. And I haven't studied it. I don't know the ins and outs of why that was, but there is to this day a Welsh-speaking community in Patagonia because people moved out of this area to South America. So the migration is constant and coming and going.
I think those are some really great examples. Thank you. So, and the last element of this day 3 task is to think about how people got around. I've put travel in my area, but actually that could be travel both within your area and also out and to your area. So, you know, obviously something like railways, if your town was a railway town, that has an absolutely massive impact upon a local place. But so did, you know, road widenings and new roads being built so that people to come through your place, so it kind of dropped off the map in terms of being an important place en route to, say, London or something like that. So those kind of travel aspects had a really big impact on local areas as well. I don't know whether, Joe, you can think of any other examples of transport that people might investigate.
Good. I'm glad you've left me with that one. No, I'm glad you've left me with that one, because obviously roads and railways, and we've got to think about the different ways that has changed over time and the impacts. And of course, we've got things like the turnpike roads and you know, the different the impact ongoing of Roman roads and things like that. But the thing that people always forget, and this has no relation to my one place study, I'm afraid, but is water, is that historically water has been a huge mover of goods and people around the world, particularly in Britain, particularly in the pre-industrial age, although we can think of this right the way up until the sort of coming of the canals in the early 19th century. But I quite often speak to people who sort of look at places and sort of think of road networks and how people might have walked from one place to the other, or ridden, perhaps, you know, taken a horse and cart. But actually quite often people moved along the coast, people moved up and down rivers, people moved along lakes. And actually, I think we've got to think, particularly if you're taking your study back into the sort of before the middle of the 19th century, you've really got to think about the way that waterways would have moved goods and people and ideas, you know, in and out. So I think that's a really important thing not to forget.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And I think I tend to think about it in terms of the impact of railways, and you're right, it deserves far more attention than that. So thank you. Okay, well, I hope you all enjoy your day 3 activities. Of course, there's a plethora of talks going on today to delve into these different elements in various details. So enjoy, and we'll see you tomorrow.